What do you do when the person who is supposed to protect you becomes your source of deepest wound? When trauma steals your sense of identity and safety and future? Today's guest knows that journey firsthand, and his story shows that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the key that unlocks the prison that you didn't realize you were living in. Welcome to Unmasked, where we take off the filters and get real about faith, failure, and finding freedom. I'm your host, Wesley Farnsworth, a dad, veteran, author, and a man who's learned that God does his best work in the middle of our mess. Each episode will have honest conversations with people who've walked through addiction, pain, or doubt, and with pastors, leaders, and everyday believers who are learning to live and lead authentically. So take a breath, pull up a chair, and let's get real. This is Unmasked. Today on Unmasked, I'm honored to welcome Scott Stewart, a man whose story carries the weight of unthinkable tragedy, but also the beauty of what God can rebuild from ashes. At just 22, Scott's world shattered when his father took his mother's life, sending him spiraling into years of darkness, self-medication, and survival. But through counseling, mentorship, and deep inner work, Scott began the slow, painful, courageous journey of healing. Along the way, he's discovered a truth that transformed everything. Forgiveness isn't about the offender. It's about the freedom for the one carrying the pain. And now Scott uses his experience to help others break toxic patterns, rebuild self-worth, and step into emotional and spiritual freedom. Today, he's here to talk about healing, resilience, and why forgiveness may just be the most powerful act of reclaiming your life. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today here on Unmasked.
Wesley, it's always a privilege and such an honor when I get to meet with folks like you and share some of these, not only the story, right, but to share some things that'll help other people. It's an honor. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. I was so happy when you accepted the invite to be on the show today. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us. So let's go ahead and just jump into it. And let's hear your background and your journey of becoming unmasked.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks. Yeah, I think we need to start obviously where it all started and some key pieces to anybody's story, and that is just to let everybody know that I was adopted at birth, and so the folks that I called mom and dad were not biologically my mom and dad. Now, not that that makes a huge difference, but for someone who has been adopted, we all have questions. We all have things that questions we want answered, and why did that happen? Yeah, but I grew up in a small town in Oregon and lived in a rural small town, about 5,500, and it didn't take me long as a young type to figure out that my dad had significant anger issues, and that he could go from normal, if there is such a thing, he'd go from normal to extremely mad in seconds. And I learned that very early, and so because of that, I learned to somewhat walk on eggshells, growing up. I never knew which dad, if you will, I was going to be, and the slightest things could just set him off. And through my years in school, public school system, middle school, high school, back then, back in those days, Wesley, I'm dating myself here, but back in those days, they didn't know this thing called ADHD. Nobody knew what that was, especially in the smaller towns. That wasn't like, what is that acronym? What is that? I mean, nobody knew. And I was clearly one of those kids. I was a product of that. And so that my learning style, it was very, very difficult for me to retain information. I could read a book and my mind would just drift off somewhere else, but I would keep reading and never, you relate. Yeah. And the struggle's real, and no matter how hard you focus, your mind just eventually, it drifts off to somewhere else. And my dad's answer to that, because of his anger and because of his upbringing, was just to yell louder, hit me harder, and discipline me even more. And that was his answer. And we know as a grown adult men, that doesn't work. That does not fix the problem. That only causes more problems. But my gosh, I couldn't, as a result of that was like every test, and this is no exaggeration, because I lived it. Every test between about the sixth grade all the way up to my senior year in high school, every test, whether that was a weekly test or a quarterly or a semester, whatever it was, I failed. I failed 9.5 out of 10 of all of those tests. And as you could imagine, what that would have done to my self-esteem, it would have just spiraled down because, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much effort I put into it, I just couldn't retain it. So for me to graduate to barely graduate high school it was such a relief because school to me represented failure because I couldn't, my friends around me, without even doing any work, they were getting C's and B's, and I would spend hours at trying to study with no results. And so as a result of that, you have the failure, and then you have a father on top of that who doesn't understand how to handle it and handle it in the worst way possible. And so for me, when graduating high school, it was more of I felt I was getting out of prison, right? Or I was getting out of, because it was so hard. It was so rough. And so I couldn't wait to get out of that school. And then shortly after that, I moved out to get away from my father because of his anger issues. Constantly yelling, being mad at over the slightest things. It was literally, I mentioned a moment ago, eggshells. And that was the life I grew up in. My mom and I were fairly close. I was tight with my mom. The unfortunate part about this, my mom was the dictionary example of enabling. She always had an excuse. She always had a reason why my dad was mad. Always. 100% of the time. Oh, honey, he had a bad day at work. He didn't get much sleep. His neck is hurting. They made him work, 4 hours overtime. She always had a reason. So this was the environment that I grew up in, and not very healthy. It did not in any way prevent me, or excuse me, promote me to step into the real world. I was ill-equipped, hands down. And combine that with my mom, as an enabler, at every corner. She taught me how to avoid conflict. That was her thing. We just have to we got to keep the peace. We can't, yeah, just, let it go, let it slide. She was the peacekeeper. And as you and I know, Wesley, as grown men with families, this world is full of conflict, and as a kid, when you step into the real world and you don't have these skills, you don't have these things in place, you're doomed, man. You just are. And so that kind of sets the stage for me. So moving along, as I moved out shortly after high school, I moved out, and the beautiful thing was not the moving out; it was getting away from my dad. I was getting away from him and his wrath, and him and his 0 to pissed off to the extreme in 3 seconds. That was a beautiful thing because I felt between not taking any more tests and not being under my dad's thumb, I felt freedom for the first time at the age of 19. And so moving along a little bit to the story, my dad's anger, if it's at all possible, it continued to increase. And when I would go see them and visit them at their house, or my mom would say, he's cleaning the gutters today. Can you come over and help him or whatever? And I'd come over, and it was within 5 minutes, within 10 minutes, he is just twisted sideways about something and raging pissed off, And so I would just go be like, yeah, I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm not putting up with you. And I just leave. I was still, to some degree, as well as I could, I was still somewhat close to my mom, but my dad, I just tried to keep some space between he and I because I just couldn't deal with it, So let's move to what you said in the introduction. When I was 22, what happened? So it was a August 5th, 1991. Yeah, literally. Oh my gosh, boy, does that ever date me? Holy cow, that doesn't feel like that long ago, Wesley. But it was a summer night in small town America in the Pacific Northwest. It was a Monday night. I was scheduled to have dinner with my mom and dad that night after dinner. And I went there, and my mom made homemade spaghetti. And man, oh, gosh, she could just that her homemade spaghetti was incredible, Wesley. I mean, you could smell that thing 2 blocks away, and it tasted so good. So she made spaghetti that night. We had a fantastic meal, and surprisingly enough, my dad's anger was in check. It was actually, if there is such thing as a normal night, it was a normal evening, and I spent a couple hours with him, and I got ready to leave, and I walked to the front door and opened up the door, and my mom kind of followed me to the front door. She said, I'll never forget it. She said, "Come here, you turn, give me a hug." And like any good son, I turned around and gave my mom a hug and kissed her on the cheek, and I said, "I love you." And I walked out the door, and what I didn't know was that was going to be the last time that would be the last time I ever saw her. Later that night, I was asleep in my bed in my house, about, call it 10 miles away, 12 miles away, whatever that is. And I got a phone call, and it was about 11:30 at night. I got a phone call, woke me up, and I answered it, and it was my cousin. And you could tell that his voice was elevated, and he said, "Scott, you have to get over here to your mom and dad's house, like right now, like right now." And I was like, still half asleep, and I'm like, "What? Get over here. I don't care what you're doing. If you're asleep, get over here to your mom and dad's house, like right now." So I hung up the phone. I got dressed, put a hat on, and jetted out the door. And when I got to where my mom and dad's street was, it was a very, very straight lane that they lived on, a very straight. And when I turned the corner, Wesley, and I started heading down that lane, I could see down about 3/4 of a mile, half mile. And oh my gosh, it looked like a small city. I mean, there was lights just flashing, way down the lane. And I was like, and my heart, my stomach, both just kind of just fell into my gut. I mean, it just fell into it, and I started getting this very, very uneasy feeling. And when I pulled up in front of their house, holy smoked, it looked like, something out of a crime scene, because it was. State police, county police. There was actually a couple city police there, even though they were a few miles out of the city limits. Ambulance, paramedics. There was this yellow tape, crime scene, do not cross. We've seen those all the way around the house. And again, this is a summer night. This is a Monday night in August, in summer. And so it's still somewhat warm out. All the windows open, doors open, lights on, and this is midnight. This is midnight to 12:30, now AM. And without going into every single detail, and to kind of speed the story along, basically an officer, law enforcement agent, police officer, cornered me, pulled me over to his squad car, sat me in the front seat, and we started talking. And he said, "Son, I'm sorry, but your mom is deceased." And I already been in such a, call it adrenaline, call it in just disbelief of what I was seeing. It was like an arrow that pierced my heart, but it bounced off, because I was like, "What?" He said, "I'm sorry." He said, "We have your dad in custody." And in any kind of a crime scene like that, family, unfortunately, but it's the reality, family is always the first suspect. They are the ones that are first looked at and interviewed, questioned, observed, and for a valid reason, because that, unfortunately, that family has a lot to do with homicides and things like that. Anyway, so they were questioning me, and I just remember just feeling like, this is a bad dream, man. This is And to wrap up this night, I will just tell you that in my father, somewhere around 30 Monday night, August 4th, while my mom lay sleeping in her bed, or at least I want to believe, Wesley, that she was asleep in her bed, he went into the garage in a fit of rage. He went into the garage and he got a stainless steel bar that was about 26, 30 inches long. And while she lay in her bed asleep, he went to work on her. I and my family's life will be forever changed from that. That was never, it was never something you see coming. And it's even thinking about back about it, it forever changed our lives. And so that's where everything changed. For me, my grandmother, my cousin, my family, it just everything changed that night. They took my dad into custody. Um, and I kind of went numb. I just kind of, looking back on it, I was such a young, lost soul, with no roots in faith. I didn't even know who God was. I heard my dad talk about God all the time, but it was not in the realm of how you and I would talk about God, right? I mean, he would use his name and cuss words constantly. And I just kind of went off the deep end. I started self-medicating with alcohol, not to get obliterated drunk, but just so I could function. So I could numb the reality and just function because I still had to go to work. And now I did have a few days off and whatnot, but it was very, very difficult to function because every time I'd start to think about this, I just turn into a babbling mess, as you might imagine, right? So my dad's in the county jail. Mom is gone. My grandmother, who I was also close to, her daughter is now dead, and her son-in-law is in jail. And she's an older woman at this time, of course, and it was very difficult to cope. And so as moving along, my sister, now this would be my half sister. My father was previously married, and so this is a woman from his previous marriage. So she's 9 years, I think, 11 years older than me. Her and I were in a little bit of communication during all of this, and she calls me and she says, this is about 2 weeks ish after this event. She calls me and she says, she goes, I need to look in my dad's eyes, and I need to know if he did this. I need to look in his eyes. She said, I'm going to go see him in jail. Do you want to go? And at this point, I'm just numb, Wesley. There's no other. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm just numb, and it's not just from the alcohol. It's from this is so traumatic. And I believe this, and I believed it then. So I'm going to say it. Regardless of whether or not you believe in God, sometimes He picks us up and carries us when we're not even able to crawl. He just does, and that was me because of this traumatic event. And so I said, okay, I'll go. So we rode down to the county jail together, and I was the first one that went in to see him. And it was exactly like you see on TV. You see the people behind the glass, they got the phone, they got the jumpsuit. I mean, it was exactly like that. I can still remember him sitting there with that smug look on his face. But we're talking on the phone, and we small talked about a couple things, and Wesley, he looked right at me with those manipulative, very cold black eyes. He looked right at me and he said, do you think I killed your mom? And I remember saying, I don't know what to believe. I'm still trying to even process this, and I hope this is just a really bad dream. That's what I kind of remember saying. And as he's just glaring at me, he goes, well, I didn't. Now, Something I skipped over that I should have said is that with a few days or about a week after all of this happened, my dad confessed to it. My dad confessed to the murder. He confessed to the police that he did it. They got it on tape. So I don't know what it is in other states, but in the state of Oregon, when you confess to murder, there's no need for a trial. You go straight to sentencing. That's just, it's just how it works. And so I'm sitting there across from him, and I'm looking at him, and he says, well, he goes, I didn't. He goes, and I'm not making this up. He said, I didn't kill your mom, but I told them I did to cover up for you because I thought you did it. If you ever had, 100 arrows blasted at you all at once, you just, it's as if I wasn't numb enough, and now I'm even number. Is that even a word? I just was so, I just couldn't believe. And he just stared there and looked at me. Now, you heard me use the word manipulation. My father was a master manipulator all my life. He had a military grade experience at manipulation. He was a master at it, probably the best I've ever seen. And I just sat there in disbelief of what I just heard. And he said a few other things, and I don't even remember what was said. I just was so in disbelief. And I got off the phone, and my sister came in and talked to him, and I just went in the other room, and I just was, again, God carries us sometimes when we just can't even crawl or can't even stand. And that was me. That was me, to be hit with that. And so we left. A short while later, we left. And on the way home, I told my sister what he said. And she just shook her head. She really didn't have anything to say. But what do you say after that? So that's where the whole everything unfolds and unravels. And I'm just left in a puddle of mess. I've been rambling on. I'm sorry, Wesley. Did you have a question, or did you want to make note of something? I'm happy to fill in any blanks if you have.
No, man, this story is. I wish I could say it was a story, but it's a lived experience, and it's just one of those things that it sounds like something you would just see on TV and in a made up story on a crime documentary, a crime show. And I'm sorry that you've had to go through this, but now I'm anxious to hear how this transformation has taken place, because you've lived through something that most people would let just make them crawl into a corner and never come out. So I'm anxious to hear the rest of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's get to that. As I had mentioned, I was just self-medicating, and it wasn't it per se to just stay drunk all the time. It was just so I could operate. That's really the most accurate way I can say that. If you take some of the pain and the reality and go when it's all the way up here, Wesley, and you drop it down to here, you can function. And that was me. Not saying I'm proud of that, but I'm saying that's what it took for me to function. And I could still go to work. I could still, at least I thought I could still function, normally. So a couple years went by, and now there were some other things that happened in there, but for the sake of time, I'm just gonna let that go, and because I want to talk about the beautiful thing that came from this, and not just the consistent negative piece about it, but it'd been a couple years, maybe 2.5 years, that I was at work, and we had a cafeteria at the place that I worked at the time. And I was having a really rough day. I was just barely holding it together. And I was sitting at a lunch table by myself eating my lunch, and this gentleman came up and sat beside me. Now he worked in a department that was next to mine, and so he and I had brief conversations, but I knew him. He was a Christian man. Now at that time I didn't know what that was, or really what that meant. What does that entail? But I knew he was a Christian man, and he sat down next to me, and we started small talking or whatever. And there was this big long pause, and I'll never forget this, because here's the turning point. Here's where everything started to change for me for the better. Long pause. And he stopped eating and he just turned and he just looked at me. And he said, "So how's it going?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, it's fine. I mean, I'm getting by." And he just stared at me and he said, "No, really, Scott, honestly, how's it going? Talk to me. How are you?" And brother, I lost it. I lost it right there. Gosh, I get emotional just thinking about this because I remember it so clearly. I just lost my crap. I'm in the middle of the lunchroom at my employer, and I just started sobbing, and I couldn't stop. And he put his arm around me, and he didn't say anything. He just put his arm around me and you know showed me some compassion. And he said, you can't keep living like this, right? And and somewhere in the depths of my heart, Wesley, I knew he was right. I couldn't. I was headed down a pretty dark road. And he said, "I'm here for you and I'll help you." And he was sometimes in life, the right people show up at just the right time and with the exact right message. And that was him. That's that hinge pin moment where life started to take a different course, if you will. And to speed the story along, I started going to counseling. Now, in today's world, here we are in 2025 at the end of the year, counseling, psychologists, they get a bad rap. And I understand why. I'm not going to defend them. But there's a lot of people with a lot of really strong hard feelings against them. Now you got to remember, folks, this this counseling didn't happen yesterday. We're now right. We're now talking about the year 2000, 1995. So this was quite a while ago. And was it God's divine direction? Was it His grace? Was it by luck? Maybe a little bit of all of it. But I found the right counselor for me. And I believe the right person is the key to healing if you're going to have some kind of therapy, a psychologist, a counselor, whatever that is. I believe the right person is critical. And for me, I had the right person. And she started working with me and she started helping me. Now, at about the same time or shortly after, I dove into personal development, personal growth, and I started healing. And before you can heal, I believe you have to feel. And now and that's kind of a cheesy way to say that, but that truly is what I experienced. You have to feel all of those things. You have to feel all of the hurt. You have to feel the times that you were abused, the times that you were emotionally, mentally abused, the times that the people who loved you and should have been protecting you abandoned you. You have to feel those things before you can heal from them. Now, I'm not a clinical psychologist by any point, but I believe that is a key pivotal piece to be able to heal from those things and to have the right person in your life. Hallelujah. Man, it makes such a difference. So, excuse me. So forward closer to that 2.5 years in from the personal growth and from the counselor, the right people showed up and it was a divine appointment. And I found God in all of that. And now prior to this, I mentioned, I had no idea what that meant, what that looked like. It's not a church. It's not a church building. It wasn't a pastor per se, but I found something that was I couldn't describe, that was a connection inside my soul that it changed my life. In today's world, sometimes the word religious gets abused, quite a bit. It wasn't a religious thing. It was a spiritual thing. It was a deep connection. And I do believe that God came into my life and I surrendered my soul and asked Jesus into my life, and things started to change. I didn't join a church. It wasn't a pastor, but something inside me had changed. Something came from out there and came into me and started changing me, started working on me. And closer to the 2.5 years into the therapy, the counselor, she says, she goes, let's talk about forgiveness. And I went, oh, yeah, yeah, I know all about that. We're not going to talk about that. Like, like somehow I knew exactly what needed to happen here. And again, Wesley, I had the right person, because she was smart enough to know that to talk to me about forgiveness, we couldn't come in through the front door. We had to come in the side door and talk about this thing, forgiveness. And she started talking to me about that and just planting seeds in my life. And here's what I found out. I didn't um I I thought I knew what forgiveness was. I did not. I had an inaccurate belief about what forgiveness is and who it's for. And when I was done with my counseling, she had planted enough seeds in my life, and I think God was working on me too as well. But I had started the forgiveness process. And I'll share something here that might be surprising to a lot of people. It took me 12 years to forgive that man, my father. 12 years. Let that sink in for a second. That whole time, I'm working on. I'm trying to let go of this. I'm trying to not carry it around with me every minute of the day, and trying not to be angry at him and pissed at him for taking my mom's life, and for treating me like dog crap. It was a process. 12 years. So the question I'm often asked is, okay, hold on, wait a minute. 12 years. What do you do? What do you do in 12 years to forgive somebody? And I'm going to lead off, because I've found 6 things. I found 6 areas where I believe people get wrapped up, tied up, stuck, if you will, around the area of forgiveness. I found 6 areas. And then the one area for me, I'm not saying this is for everybody, but the one area for me that was very difficult was, I say I forgive him, but yet 3 hours later, I start having these negative thoughts, and now I'm pissed again at him. And I just, I wish I could give to him what he gave to my mom. I'd forgive him the next day out loud, and I'd say, I don't want to carry this with me the rest of my life. I forgive you. I forgive you. And then the next day, I find myself pissed off again. What does that mean? And let me look at my notes here just real quick. This is not, Wesley, this is not a sermon, but this is the most accurate way that I have found for me that I was able to forgive somebody. In the book of Matthew, Peter goes to Jesus, and we've all heard this sermon. Even for folks that don't go to church or whatever, you may have heard this passage. But in the book of Matthew, Peter goes to Jesus, and at the moment Jesus is teaching. He's teaching to a crowd. We don't know how big the crowd is. It could have been 10 people. It could have been 1,000 people. We don't know. But in between teaching, Peter comes to Jesus and says, How many times should I forgive them? Do you think I should forgive them 7 times? Now, I think Peter probably thought, that's pretty noble. 7 times. I'm going to forgive 7 times. I mean, that's a lot, right? And what does Jesus say? He goes, no. What about 7 times 70? Or what about 7 times 77? Now, depending upon which translation you read in Scripture, by the way, I think it's Matthew 18:21 through 22. Depending upon which translation you read, you're going to get some different numbers. Can we all agree that what Jesus was saying was, you need to forgive them a lot? That's the message here. Don't get hung up on whether it's 7 times 77 or 77. I mean, don't get hung up on that. Here's my conviction. I'm not saying it should be your conviction. I'm saying it's my conviction. Every time that anger boils up inside of you every time that memory comes into your head and starts to produce bitterness. Every time you start to think of all the reasons why you should be mad at somebody, that's when you forgive them. And how do you do that? You out loud say, you take that thought and you go, nope, nope, no, I am not going to accept that. I forgive them. And you say it out loud. And Wesley, that's exactly what I did. 12 years.
That's so powerful. It's something that I think most people struggle with is forgiving other people, but also themselves. And so that's just such a good step to think about. And just hey, a quick pause here. If something in this first part of this episode is speaking to you, there's been some deep stuff shared. If something's speaking to you, uh, and somebody came to mind that you thought they need to hear this, would you just take quick pause here just and share it with somebody else? Seriously, that's how conversations like these get started and get in front of people who need to hear it, because maybe they will never find this episode if you don't share it. And you never know what sharing one thing can help somebody else overcome what they may be dealing with. So would you share it? All right, let's go ahead and jump back in, Scott. Didn't want to interrupt you there, but I feel like there's somebody out there that's probably like, man, this person needs to hear this, and so I want to encourage them to share it with them. So talk to us. I mean, just forgiving that many times is not an easy thing to do, and it can be very easy um, to feel repetitive, and be like, well, what's one more time going to do? What helped you reframe forgiveness from something that seemed impossible to something that seemed transformational?
Yeah, I think that the Wesley, the direct answer to that was, which is one of the six that I mentioned a few moments ago. You have to want to. You have to want to do this. Now, that sounds that sounds a little bit shallow and a little bit easy, but here's what I mean by that. Look, if you are plotting revenge, if you are intent on settling the score, if you're intent on getting revenge and you're plotting their demise, I'm going to show them, I'm going to even the score. You That's not wanting to forgive. That's revenge. And those two things cannot live in the same camp. I was a young man. I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids. The piece that I wanted to be free from was not carrying this with me the rest of my life. Now, when I say carry that, what I really mean is to be unhealed, and it's like an open sore, an open wound, and I just carry it with me every day, and it festers and it hurts and there's pain and I see it every day. I didn't want that. I wanted to be free from this. I will take a second and share with you that when I was 14 years old, we were on a family hunting trip in Eastern Oregon, and one of my jobs to get ready for that elk hunting trip was to put certain things, load up the Jeep, load up the trailer, so we could go hunting. We could have all the supplies that we needed. And I had forgotten one of the things. And when we had gotten to elk camp and my dad found out that I had forgotten to put one of those things in the trailer, he went off on me. And here we are in the middle of the woods, and he is screaming at the top of his lungs at me for what felt like 5 minutes because I forgot something. And at a time where that was supposed to be the most enjoyable time to be a family vacation, a family getaway, a hunting trip, here he is degrading me and belittling me and screaming at me in front of all of the family. There was probably 8 of us around the campfire, maybe 9. And he was humiliating me. And I remember walking away from that, and I went probably 75 yards away, and I was by a tree. And for the first time in my life, I said, God, I don't know who you are, but if you will get me through this, I promise I will never raise my kids like this. That was, again, a pivotal moment. And so coming back to the time of healing, I didn't want to carry this with me. I wanted to heal from this. I didn't want to pass this garbage that had this program, right? Like a computer. I was programmed by this man. I didn't want to pass that on to my kids. I wanted them to have a better father experience than I had. And so the second piece of this is you have to want to forgive. Not, the second piece to this is forgiveness isn't always a one-time thing. Sometimes it's an ongoing thing. And for me, that was 12 years before I finally felt like when I say, nope, I forgive you, those thoughts never came back into my head again. 12 years. True story. Yeah.
Many listeners, many listeners feel stuck. It's a recurring theme. They feel stuck because the pain that they're experiencing is so real, much like you were experiencing during those 12 years trying to forgive. And to them, forgiveness feels like betraying themselves, or minimizing what happened. They feel like if they forgive, then whatever happened didn't happen, right? They're minimizing it. So what lies or misunderstandings about forgiveness do you see people most struggle with right now, and what do you tell them?
Yeah, perfect question, brother. You couldn't have asked a more perfect question. The one answer to that is forgiveness is never for the other person. Forgiveness is for you. And that has to become your belief. Because if your belief is, if you think, well, I'm going to forgive somebody, that means I'm going to excuse their behavior. No, it is not. No, it's not. Forgiveness is not excusing someone else's behavior. Forgiveness, please hear me, hear me clearly. What forgiveness does is it allows you to continue to go through life so that when you think of that event, it doesn't wreck you. It doesn't destroy you. It doesn't fill your head full of anger and bitterness and resentment and think of retaliation. That's what forgiveness does. So that means forgiveness is for you. Forgiveness is for you. It's letting go. It has nothing to do, really, it has nothing to do with the other person. Forgiveness is for you. So it's the best gift you can give yourself is to let that go and give yourself the peace.
That's good. So good. Yeah. Forgiveness and healing is a slow process. It's messy. It can be really messy as you're working through all of the emotions and everything that goes with it. So you've mentioned the practices of forgiving every single time it crawls into your mind or passes through your mind. But what other practices or rhythms or support systems did you put in place that actually helped you rebuild your mind, body, and soul during those early years and even today that still helps you as when those things cross your mind?
Yeah. There's a few things, Wesley. A few other things here real quick is that sometimes people think that forgiveness, it requires forgetting. We have to forget the event in order to forgive it. I don't even know where that came from, but that is such a lie. It is such a lie. You are not required to forget. Just understand you're not required to forget. The idea is that you forgive so that when you remember, it doesn't wreck you, right? It doesn't leave you bitter. It doesn't leave you angry. Another one is, forgiveness doesn't equal trust. I can forgive somebody and heck no. Will I trust them again? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Why? Because I can choose, and it is a choice. I choose to forgive somebody, but trust is earned. Trust is earned. Forgiveness is given by my choice. Don't have to trust somebody. My father, pretty bad guy, pretty bad dude. Do you think, based on what I've shared in this story, do you ever think that I wanted him around my daughters because of his manipulation and just abusiveness? No. I'll forgive you, but I'm not going to trust you. And because I'm not going to trust you, I'm going to set a boundary. That's a whole nother episode is boundaries. But I'm holding you off to the side. You're in a boundary because I don't trust you. And I'll forgive you and I'll let go of that pain and bitterness. But no, I'm not going to trust you again. The other piece is, forgiveness does not change the past at all. Can't change one thing about the past. None of this is what I've shared this last 50 minutes. None of that's going to change based on my willingness or wanting to forgive. Here's what it does do, and this means everything. Forgiving that man changed my future. Changed my future. All the years I had left, the time that I was raising my daughters, the times for me to be a healthy, supporting, providing, nurturing husband to my wife, changed that. Forgiveness changed my future. And the future is all we got. The current moment and the current moment. But moving into the future, you can't drag that crap with you. Or you can, but it'll ruin it. It'll screw it up. It'll mess it up. So forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it does change your future. You have to remember that. And your future is more important than what's happened in the past, because we have the choice today to change how we raise our kids, right? How we treat our spouse. So there's some pieces there that you need to understand about forgiveness to help you to move forward. The other piece, I think, to answer your question directly, and then I want to hear what you have to say, Wesley. The other piece for me was, again, as I had mentioned, at the age of 14, I went at that elk camp, and I told God, I said, I never want to be the kind of parent to my kids that my dad is to me. That I meant that. That was not out of an emotional moment. That was a sincere from glimpse of my heart. And the cool thing about this is that I broke the cycle, because my dad was abusive, emotionally, mentally, physically. His dad, abusive, emotionally, mentally, physically. His dad, again, abusive, mentally, emotionally, and physically. I broke that cycle. And I don't say that with pride. I don't say that with arrogance. I say that because, hallelujah, my kids will never know what it's like to have an abusive father who did those things to me. They'll never know what that's like, because I was never that guy. I was never that man. You think about the legacy that we leave with our kids, our grandkids, and their kids, right? Is that, as a man, I just want to ask some of the people listening, is that not enough for you to say, I don't want to be known I don't want to be known as an a-hole. I don't want to be known as that mean guy who yelled and screamed at my kids and belittled them and embarrassed them. To me, that meant a lot. I wanted my kids to be close to me. I wanted my kids to look up and go, this is the way a man should be. I wanted to set that example for them. I wanted, again, not pridefully, but I wanted to be their hero. I wanted to be their teacher, but I wanted to be stern and understand that, dad is full of love and he's full of grace, but here I am, and this is the way a man should be. And as a beautiful thing, as a result, my daughter this last year married a man, and I could not have asked for a better man that she married. My heart is full. My heart is full. Wesley, out of 5 boxes, brother, he checks 4.5 of the 5 boxes. How could I ask for anything better? To take care of my firstborn daughter. My mini me, my girl who we were just like this growing up. So I think that, I hope that answers some of your questions about, what does it take to forgive, and what are some of the pieces that you need to put in place to make that happen.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I love how faith has played a role. I mean, it's clear, just evident hearing you share how faith has played a role in all of this. And I think that's an important part. So every episode, I love to leave my guests with an action step, something that they can meditate on, that they can implement in their lives to move forward as they work on becoming unmasked. And so for the person listening today who carries deep resentment, they carry family wounds, they carry feelings of betrayal, and it feels like forgiveness to them is just impossible. What is the very first step that they can take towards freedom without feeling overwhelmed by the whole journey?
Yeah, I think the very first step, as I had mentioned, is do you want to forgive them? And that's not a question you have to answer to me, but it is a question you have to answer to yourself. Do you want to do this? Do you want to let go of this? Because if you are wrapped around the axle, and I'm saying this with love. Please don't misread my message. Please don't misread my message. If you're gonna hide behind being a victim, again, I'm saying this with love. I'm not trying to cast judgment. If you're going to hide behind being a victim of an event and that you've grasped to that identity, you need to look really, really close inward and go, do I want to forgive this, or do I want to hang on to this piece of identity? You really do. So that's the first step. Do you want to forgive them? If there's even this much in your heart that says, no, I do, I think I do, then here's what you need to start doing. Here's action step number one. Start saying out loud, even when it doesn't feel normal. Here's what you say. Hear me clearly, folks. Hear me clearly, please. No, I choose to forgive them. Just start with that. When that anger and that bitterness and those sorrowful memories come in and just sweep over you like a wave, a tsunami wave, and I do understand what that is, you have to stop and say, no, stop. I choose to forgive. Just start with that. Start with that. I choose to forgive. Say it out loud. If you're in a public place, say it real quiet. You don't have to yell it. Say it quiet to yourself. No, I choose to forgive. That's how you start. That's how you start. Just take the first step. You may have to say that 1,000 times. You may only have to say that 50 times, but that's how you start. I choose to forgive. You say it out loud. Don't say it in your mind. I probably did that, Wesley. Brother, I probably did that a couple hundred times. No joke. No exaggeration. No, I'm not going to be angry. I choose to forgive. That's your action step right there.
There you go, folks. You heard it straight from, if he's not an expert on forgiveness, I don't know what makes him. I mean, it's just the things he's been through. And Scott is a living proof of the thing that I say time and time again on the show. And I'm going to repeat it one more time. You're not defined by how you were brought up. You're not defined by the things that you've done, and you're not defined by the things that have happened to you. You're defined only by who you say you are, and more importantly, who God says that you are. So, Scott, thank you so much for sharing your story. For the listeners that want to hear more about you or find you, is there someplace online that they can find you?
Yeah, I'm not on social media as much as I used to be, simply because it can get too consuming. But here's what I would say. If you'd like to shoot me an email, and just whether it's vent or whether it's share what you've learned, or even a little bit, if you're looking for feedback, if you're looking for some help or support, shoot me an email, Scott Stewart Speaking at Gmail. I'd love to hear from you. No strings attached. I'm not going to try and sell you something. Go Scott Stewart Speaking at gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook and on LinkedIn, but again, I'm trying to limit some of my social media use these days for various reasons. But I'd love to hear from you. If this spoke to you, Scott Stewart Speaking at gmail.com.
And folks, I'll leave that down in the show notes so that you can find it quickly and easily in the future. Well, Scott, Thank you so much for joining me today on Unmasked and for being so open and honest about your story. If something in this episode spoke to you, don't let it stop with you. Share it with one person that God put on your heart while you were listening. You never know whose breakthrough might start with just a simple message from you. If you want encouragement or more information on me or having me speak at your church or event, you can find me at wesleyfarnsworth.com. And make sure that you connect with the Unmasked community online via all social media. Until next time, remember that grace is greater than your past, and real freedom begins the moment that you choose to live unmasked. God bless you.